professionally or literally, to say so out loud. The operation, as Marcus and Elena slowly reconstructed it over the following 2 years through correspondence, prison visitation records, and Marcus's own quiet reinvestigation using contacts he'd built over 3 decades, was the work of a man named Adrian Voss, Kestrel House's charismatic managing director, a man Elena had known for 15 years as warm, generous, a passionate champion of the arts who had personally recruited her for half the major authentications of her career. It was Adrian who had built relationships with a small, brilliant network of restorers and forgers across Italy and Eastern Europe capable of producing sleeper forgeries, genuine antique canvases, stripped of their original, lesser paintings and repainted using period-accurate materials and techniques so precise that only the most obscure forensic markers, like restoration varnish types, would ever betray them. He had spent over a decade seeding these forgeries into the market slowly, patiently, never more than one every few years, always through. Then start looking at your own case the same way, Odaly said. Somebody built a forgery convincing enough to fool an expert, and a frame convincing enough to fool a jury. Both of those things take skill. Skilled people leave signatures, even when they think they've covered every trace. You just have to learn to see them. It became Elena's obsession for the next 11 years, not rage, though the rage was always there, banked low and controlled, but a slow, meticulous rebuilding of her own case using the exact skills that had made her one of the best authenticators in Europe before all of it was taken from her. She got access, through a prison education program, to correspondence courses in digital forensics. She wrote letters, careful, patient, unemotional letters, to art crime investigators, to journalists who covered the auction world, to a retired Interpol art fraud specialist named Marcus O'Heen who had spent 30 years chasing forged old masters across 3 continents and who, after 2 years of Elena's letters, finally wrote back with a single line. Send me everything you remember about the 6 weeks you spent with that canvas. Every detail. Even the ones that seemed unimportant at the time. What Elena remembered, once she forced herself to go back through those 6 weeks with the clarity of hindsight instead of trust, was a single detail she had noted at the time and dismissed as unimportant, a restoration varnish layer beneath the surface that shouldn't have been there on a canvas with clean 18th century provenance, a varnish type that hadn't come into common use among restorers until the 1920s. She had flagged it in her private working notes, not her final report, just her private notes, the ones nobody but her had ever seen, as anomaly to revisit, and then, in the rush of finalizing a career-defining authentication, she had let it go, telling herself it was probably a later minor restoration, common enough on old canvases, nothing. Different authenticators, always laundering the enormous profits through a web of charitable arts foundations that gave him both cover and, cruelly, a public reputation as one of the industry's great philanthropists. Julian Marsh had discovered the pattern independently, cross-referencing sales records in a side project that had nothing to do with Elena's authentication, and had called her that night not to accuse her, but because he trusted her eye more than anyone else's and needed someone to look at the canvas with him one more time before he took his suspicions to the board. Adrian, having intercepted enough of Julian's internal emails through a compromised assistant loyal to him rather than to Julian, had understood the danger with perfect, cold clarity days before either Julian or Elena did. He had arranged the poisoning himself, using knowledge of rare toxicology gaps gleaned from a cousin who worked in forensic pathology, and had spent the following weeks constructing the frame against Elena with the same meticulous patience he brought to laundering forged paintings, a spoofed phone number for the incriminating text message, a shell account in Elena's name funded through an intermediary, a private investigator on retainer who specialized in exactly this kind of manufactured financial trail. Elena was released after 14 years, at 56, on the strength of an appeal Marcus O'Heen had spent 2 years building alongside a pro bono defense attorney named Priya Anand, using digital forensics that proved the incriminating text message had originated from a spoofed number using technology that hadn't even existed in a form accessible to Elena's phone carrier at the time, alongside forensic banking records showing the £200,000 bribe had been wired through an account opened using a forged copy of Elena's passport, obtained months before her arrest through a break-in at her own accountant's office that had, at the time, been dismissed as a minor, unsolved burglary. The appeal vacated her conviction. It did not, by itself, touch Adrian Voss, who had spent 14 years becoming even more powerful, more publicly beloved, his name now attached to museum wings and art scholarships across 2 continents, his forgery network, Marcus's continued investigation revealed, now operating at a scale involving at least 11 paintings and estimated profits north of £300 million. He'll have contingencies, Marcus warned Elena, the week of her release, sitting across from her in a small flat in London that Priya Anand had helped arrange. A man who's evaded discovery for this long doesn't just fold because you're free. We need something he can't spin, can't launder, can't explain away with lawyers and charity galas. Elena's answer to that problem came from the one place her enemies had never thought to look, because they had spent 14 years assuming the trial had permanently destroyed the one weapon she'd always had, her eye. I authenticate paintings, she told Marcus. That's still what I do better than almost anyone alive, even after everything. If Adrian Voss has 11 forgeries moving through the market, they all share that same restoration varnish anomaly, and they all pass through his hands eventually because he's the one who controls which experts get called in to authenticate the ones that matter most.